A ruling of the Court of Justice of the European Union attempts to force Poland to recognise so-called same-sex marriages. These are unions entered into in other member states that are contrary to the Polish constitution. In such a situation, the question arises as to which law takes precedence, national or European Union. The most important and highest source of law in Poland is the constitution. It is definitely more important than EU law, which is hierarchically subordinate to the constitution. This results from Article 8 of the Constitution, which states, "The Constitution is the supreme law of the Republic of Poland." It is worth noting that Poland has only transferred part of its powers to the European Union under the treaties. Despite this, Brussels has long been trying to expand its powers outside the treaties, for example, by interfering in the Polish judiciary. As a sovereign country, Poland did not consent to such an unconditional transfer of powers, primarily legislative powers, or to the unconditional application of the principle of the primacy of European Union law, above all, over the Polish legal system and our hierarchy of legal acts and sources of law. In the past, the Polish Constitutional Tribunal has ruled on this matter, confirming that the Constitution takes precedence over EU law. The Constitutional Tribunal, in its unquestionable composition, also ruled that on this issue in its judgments examining the compatibility of the accession treaty under which we joined the EU and then the Lisbon Treaty. In fact, apart from the current situation where attempts are being made to turn the Court of Justice of the European Union into some kind of super court, a super judge over our courts, no one has ever questioned this. The ruling of the Polish Constitutional Tribunal is not an exception on an EU scale. Similar positions have been adopted in Germany, France, the Czech Republic, Denmark and Spain. Supporters of the supremacy of EU law over the Polish constitution emphasize that the constitution obliges Poland to comply with binding international law. But what happens when bodies such as the Court of Justice of the European Union exceed their powers? If a given organisation exceeds its powers, exceeds what we agreed to in the treaty, then even laws do not take precedence. Simply put, EU law or international law is not binding in this regard. However, the Court of Justice of the European Union takes a different view and has long been pressing member states to treat European law as superior. Interestingly, in 2004, when the draft constitution for Europe was being worked on, the European Union attempted to subordinate national legal systems to itself. There was a clear provision, Article 1.6, which stated that European Union law has absolute priority over the legislation of member states, including their constitutions. It was a far-reaching draft treaty centralizing the European Union, just like the current proposals. The draft was rejected in referendums in France and the Netherlands, after which the European Union gave up on pushing it further. All this shows that the member states of the European Union have never intended to relinquish the primacy of their constitutions.
The European Commission has confirmed this. Belgian police entered the buildings of the European Union's diplomatic service and the College of Europe in Bruges. This is part of an investigation into fraud in EU institutions.
Confirmed that the police was today at the AS buildings, and this is part of the ongoing investigation of the activities that took place before in the previous mandate. And there's nothing more we can provide you with because there is now an ongoing investigation happening.
3 people have been detained. One of them is Federica Mogherini, former head of EU diplomacy and currently rector of the aforementioned College of Europe. All of them have been released, but they face imprisonment for fraud, corruption, conflict of interest, and breach of state secrecy. There are serious suspicions that during the tender procedure for the program, Article 169 of the Financial Regulation, unfair competition was violated, and that confidential information about the ongoing tender procedure was disclosed to one of the candidates participating in the tender. This concerns irregularities in the tender for a 9-month training program for young diplomats from European Union countries in 2021 to 2022. The tender was won by the College of Europe, headed by Federica Mogherini as rector.
And there is an ongoing investigation, and once and if more can be disclosed, we will be doing so.
Federica Mogherini served as High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Commission from 2014 to 2019. During this time, she worked closely with the President of the European Council at the time, Donald Tusk. Observing the European Union for some time now, we have been learning about corruption-prone events, and all this shows that it is not an organization that is immune to such activities. It does not draw any conclusions from successive scandals. On the contrary, one might even believe that some politicians are under a protective umbrella and continue to commit these crimes. According to the newspaper Le Soir, among those arrested is also Italian Stefano Sannino, former Secretary General of the European External Action Service. European institutions seem to be completely out of the control of member states, right? They do what they want, and there are some very disturbing things going on there. We had the first signs in the European Parliament. We remember those scandals related to contacts with lobbyists. There is no effective supervision there, and unfortunately, we are learning about new episodes of this spectacle in the following months. Because this is not the first criminal scandal in the European Union in recent times. 3 years ago, also in December, the police knocked on the door of Eva Kaili, the vice president of the European Parliament at the time, among others. For the European Parliament, an institution that presents itself as the guardian of the rule of law and likes to criticize others, this is a heavy blow. The prosecutor's office charged her with corruption, participation in a criminal group, and money laundering. She was officially arrested. Among the evidence secured by the police was 600,000 euros found in one of the houses searched in connection with the case. This does not bode well for the future of the European Union, which will probably have to face enormous organizational problems, and in fact, this could lead to its collapse. Italians are also concerned about the condition and future of the European Union. They have demanded the return of nearly 2,500 tons of gold, worth over $300 billion, including the following sentence in next year's budget. Gold reserves managed and stored by the Bank of Italy belong to the Italian people. However, the European Central Bank warns that decisions on foreign exchange reserves and gold in the Eurozone countries belong to the Euro system. In other words, a sovereign state cannot decide on its own gold without the consent of EU institutions. The problem with the European Union, but also with the European courts, is that they usurp powers not granted to them under the treaties. European countries also resisted this in referendums. The problem is that all these solutions, which have not been accepted by the European demos, are being introduced through the back door. After Poland's entry into the Eurozone, announced by the December 13th coalition, Polish reserves, over 500 tons worth about 100 billion zloty, would also come under the control of the Euro system. And there is something to fight for, because in recent years, Poland has climbed to the 12th place among the world's richest countries in terms of gold reserves. However, as long as the nation has the Polish zloty, the gold belongs to Poland. No compromise on peace in Ukraine. After 5 hours of talks in Moscow between the American and Russian delegations, there was only limited agreement in developing security guarantees for Ukraine, with the most important issues, namely the shape of the new borders, still on the table. NATO foreign ministers discussed the future of Ukraine in Brussels, but without the U.S. Secretary of State, who did not attend the talks. Here on the front line, no one has the slightest doubt about the outcome of the peace talks with Putin. The peace plan with Russia will not work. They do not need peace right now, and it does not look as though they want to sign a peace agreement. Russia only understands the language of force. That is how we need to talk to them. Otherwise, the ceasefire will lead to another war in the near future. After 5 hours of talks in Moscow, American negotiators Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are returning home with the Kremlin's agreement on certain security guarantees for Ukraine, but territorial issues remain a bone of contention. These were difficult negotiations, says U.S. President Donald Trump.
Not an easy situation. Let me tell you what a mess It's a war that never would have happened if I were president, not even a chance. And it didn't happen for 4 years.
Despite the difficulties, the Ukrainian side also sees a chance for an agreement.
A little bit optimism was in my words because of some speed of negotiations, and from American side, their interest in it. It showed that America is not withdrawing now from any kind of diplomatic way of dialogue, and it is good.
The Americans consistently declare their readiness to negotiate a lasting peace.
These are the kinds of things. Stop the war, make sure they never get invaded or attacked again, protect Ukraine's longstanding and long-term sovereignty and independence so that they don't become a puppet state, they're actually independent and sovereign, and allow their economy not just to recover, but to prosper and turn it into a story of prosperity.
However, if the peace talks fail, it will certainly mean greater involvement and greater costs for Europe.
Some of these people have this notion that our policy should be just continue to fund Ukraine in unlimited amounts for as long as the war takes. That's not realistic. That's not reality. And that's not going to happen. And we've been saying that for a long time. Well, you can't sustain the scale and scope of it. And I also think it's realistic for Russia to continue this war.
And it was precisely this support for Ukraine that the foreign ministers of NATO member states discussed today in Brussels. It is significant that the U.S. Secretary of State was absent from the meeting. This was the first time in 26 years.
Peace talks are ongoing. That's good, but at the same time we have to make sure that whilst they take place, and we are not sure when they will end, that Ukraine is in the strongest possible position to keep the fight going, to fight back against the Russians, but also in the strongest possible position when peace talks really get to a point where they sit at the table.
Europe has understood that sending helmets and faulty military equipment will not change the situation on the front line. The foreign ministers of Norway, Poland, Germany, and the Netherlands have pledged $500 million as part of a program to purchase American weapons for Ukraine.
Norway today will announce an additional $500 million for Pearl programs. Distributed in 2 packages, one together with Germany and Poland and one together with Germany and the Netherlands, because this is really a moment to ramp up support for Ukraine. They need to be able to negotiate from a position of strength.
Meanwhile, tomorrow, Putin is flying to India for 2 days to discuss, among other things, the sale of oil and military equipment.
What next for Venezuela? The United States is putting pressure on the country's president, Nicolas Maduro, who is clearly willing to risk war in the region and has no intention of relinquishing the power he has fought for in his country for years, using every means at his disposal. United States troops are present in the region and ready to attack at any moment. These are still only exercises, but a US strike on Venezuela seems to be only a matter of time. We know where the bad guys live, and we're about to take action. Nicolas Maduro remains in Venezuela, and there are no signs that he is planning to flee. For weeks, he has been mobilizing people to fight, shouting the same slogans about love for the homeland and fighting to the end at rallies. Victory forever, victory forever, victory forever. The American media estimates that the United States has already assembled 11 warships and over 15,000 soldiers off the coast of Venezuela, and this is most likely not the end. Officially, the United States is conducting exercises in many countries in the region, including Panama. It's about survival in the jungle because although we have jungle experts, the jungle we are used to is a little different from the Panamanian jungle. So we are using the experience of our Panamanian instructors to learn how to build shelters, how to make cutlery out of bamboo, how to light a fire for cooking, and so on. Following President Donald Trump's recent call to completely close the airspace over Venezuela, most flights have been suspended. From Caracas Airport, you may still fly to Russia, among other destinations. People are confused and scared. It is unclear which flights have been cancelled and which have not, so people have been coming in to ask. But we all hope that everything will be fine. Pope Leo XIV was asked about the potential conflict during yesterday's return flight from Lebanon to Rome. The Holy Father, while urging dialogue, did not deny the need to remove Maduro, who rules Venezuela through the security apparatus and electoral fraud. from power.
In that sense, I would say that we all need to work together. One of the values of this trip is precisely to raise the world's attention to the possibility that dialogue and friendship between Muslims and Christians is possible. I think one of the great lessons that Lebanon can teach to the world is precisely showing a land where Islam, Christianity are both present.
On Monday, Reuters reported that in November, President Trump offered the Venezuelan leader the opportunity to relinquish power and flee the country safely. But he declined, demanding amnesty for himself and his entourage. For 3 months, the United States has been conducting a campaign against ships suspected of transporting drugs to the United States, primarily from Venezuela.